Hey everyone, welcome to our DevOps office hours. It's November 30th, 2022. My name is Eric Osterman and I'll be leading the conversation. I'm the founder and CEO of Cloud Posse. Cloud Posse is a DevOps accelerator. We help companies conquer AWS using our proven blueprints for AWS. If you're starting from scratch or just not happy with the state of your infrastructure today, then go to cloudposse.com/quiz. Again, cloudposse.com/quiz to book a session with me directly, and I'll show you what your future could look like. So for those of you new to the call, the format is very informal. My goal is to get your questions answered. If you're curious about Cloud Posse or any of our open source tools or modules, this is a great place to ask. If you're tuning in from our podcast or YouTube channel, you can register for these live and interactive sessions by going to cloudposse.com/office hours. Again, that's cloudposse.com/office hours. We host these calls every week. Our call today is recorded. We'll automatically post a recording of the session today to our YouTube channel. So if you enjoy the content and want to support what we do, please hit those like and subscribe buttons. Just head over to youtube.com/cloudposse. Again, that's youtube.com/cloudposse to subscribe. So with that said, let's jump into announcements. So the AWS announcements dwarfs everything else. So I thought I would just start with a few minor things that came across my feed. One was a tool called TF Provider Lint. Now, there's 1,000 Terraform linting tools out there, and you can build your own with JSON schema and conf test and all these other ones using open policy agent. This one here though is strictly focused on linting your actual Go provider code. So if you're developing Go providers, this could be a nice one to add to your CI pipelines to check for common best practices here asserted by the tool. So there's actually quite a lot of checks here, and we haven't tested it out yet, but we have our own providers, so probably something we should look into testing out.
I'm actually curious if it supports the new framework, or this is the old style. I'd have to look at the code. I haven't looked at this.
Yeah, check that out. Let me know.
Yeah.
Any questions on that before we move on? All right. The next one was a AWS Labs project. I'm not sure how effective it would be in practice, but it is a policy validator for AWS best practices of IAM policies within your Terraform code. I don't know how, it's one thing if it determines this based on the HCL code, and honestly, these policies might not even be available in the HCL code. They could be read from a file or elsewhere. So unless this is evaluating against the actual plan file, I think the mileage of this will vary, but still interesting. And well, if it's doing it against the plan file, then the problem is it won't tell you where the broken policy is or the bad policy. Okay, let's go into the top announcements for AWS reInvent. Linda can share this link. This is a list of some of the highlights. There's way too many to go over, but fortunately, I have an awesome crew of people sending me links all week long. So here are the things that stand out that I think you guys will like too. So one is a change to AWS Config. I don't know what this means in practice. What I want it to mean to me is now using AWS Config APIs, it would be theoretically possible that when you do a Terraform plan, you could understand the impact of that. This is saying that you can now proactively check for compliance with AWS config rules prior to resource provisioning. Matt, do you have any more insight on this one?
Yeah, I think there's some API calls that go along with this. So you can essentially call AWS Config to see if the changes you're about to make are compliant or not. And then obviously you could stop that by doing that. But as far as I can see, there's no like Terraform like integration or anything yet.
Yeah.
Like, so we'd have to build some sort of pipeline to kind of hook the, like in the same way that we built a pipeline to hook like OPA to see like, hey, does this pass? And then we fail the pipeline if the open policy agent checks don't pass. I think we would have to build this into like Atmos to do something similar with AWS Config. You basically say, here's my proposed change. Would this pass? And then it tells you like yes or no kind of thing.
So that's an interesting thing. So the part that I didn't catch initially, this is resource provisioning, not changes to AWS config rules themselves. So let's say you're going to make a change to your EKS cluster or something, and there's an AWS config rule requiring a minimum of 1 node per AZ or something, and this change would break that. You could actually somehow get that policy validation back before making the change.
Yeah, so they have native integration as this announcement with CloudFormation. So I suspect that other IAC tool providers will come along at some point.
I understand. Okay, that's cool. So that makes a lot more sense. So this is basically getting the policy type capabilities that have existed in Terraform Cloud and Spacelift and other places like that in line with CloudFormation, so you can get policy controls and preempt.
It's basically saying like, so AWS config is to this point has been reactive, right? You provision infrastructure, and then AWS config will tell you this either is or isn't like in compliance with the things that we want to have out there. And this is now making it proactive, where like as part of the deployment process currently with CloudFormation, it will let you know if the new things that you're trying to provision will take you out of compliance, basically. And I haven't actually tested this, but presumably it will allow you to stop and roll back if that's the case. But I'm just extrapolating that from what I read. I haven't actually tried that myself, so I don't really know.
Yeah, makes sense. Anyone have something to add to this announcement? All right.
I have a question.
Yeah, go for it.
So, so at my day job, we've been trying to understand how AWS config pricing works. And I know there's two main line items: the configuration items recorded, i.e., how many configuration items there are, and then like a 1/10 of a penny per rule evaluation. So my question, if you're familiar with the terms here, what is a configuration item?
So basically a configuration item is anything that it's looking at to be able to compute rules on. So like if you said you had a rule for like S3 buckets, basically like every S3 bucket in your account that it looked at to try to figure it out, like is a configuration item. So at the end of the day, what it does is it stores like every like resource that you might have a rule around, and then it runs these rules across those like instances of the resources. So if you had a rule for S3 buckets and you had 500 S3 buckets in your account, you'd have 500 configuration items, and then you'd have one rule that looked at those 500 configuration items to try to figure out if it's compliant or not. So that's kind of like the simplest example I can hopefully give.
Gotcha.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it wouldn't, unless I guess wrote a rule to do so, it wouldn't branch out to like each object in my configuration in my bucket, right?
Yeah. So like there are lots of things that you can write configuration like policies on, and depending on what it is, you can explode that number of items. But what I can tell you is we've got some fairly large customers that are using AWS Config in like, 20 plus accounts across like 16 regions, gathering a whole bunch of different things. And, they're still only paying like a few $100s a month for AWS Config. So while at first you start going like, wow, this seems like it could explode, in practice, it doesn't really get that expensive, honestly.
I thought it was a few $100s per account though.
No, we ended up going back and looking at that. We originally thought it was going to be like $400 an account.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, I think we figured out that we were like, in one of those large scenarios, we were spending like $400 in aggregate across all accounts.
Yeah.
Per month.
This is, well, for us though, we're similarly sized in terms of resources. One of the things that we've been looking at AWS Config for is to evaluate our compliance with our tagging policy. But tagging policy is something that would be very extensive, I would think, in terms of configuration items then, which could turn into something else would be cost prohibitive.
Yeah, I mean, it would be basically everything that could be tagged in your account would essentially get that. I think with that, you would probably be, but this is again, reactive evaluation you're looking at there, right? Not proactive, making sure that every item is tagged.
Correct. We were thinking about SAPs from the proactive side.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you. That was very informative.
All right. The next announcement is fully managed blue-green deployments in Amazon Aurora and Amazon RDS. So is this the idea that you can make any change to your clusters and the cluster will be fully online until the new cluster is available with a replicated data set, which could presumably take days, depending on the size of the cluster, and then flip over.
Yeah, so if you think about like version upgrades, patches, schema migrations, etc., like this is awesome. You can basically do it on the secondary replica, make sure that it works as expected, and then flip what's blue and green, and you instantly point to the new I want to say the new instance, but you flip blue and green essentially, in that case.
I could understand it for everything else, but I didn't understand how it relates to schema modifications, because schema modifications don't go through the AWS APIs.
Because it works at the Postgres level.
I mean, I know the companies that use Liquibase for this kind of stuff. So it's done at the code level, the schema change. So through the code pipeline. Before
just to be
changes.
Just to be clear on this whole thing, like they're not saying that they do anything to help you do schema migrations. What they're saying is you can do a schema migration. So if say that blue is currently production, and that's what you're running off, you can do a schema migration to green, ensure that it works. All your data is still being copied, is still being replicated like to the green version, and then you can switch green to production once you're sure that schema migration has passed and is working, and you just flip-flop the blue and green, and then you can apply the schema migration to the blue at that point to get them into complete parity.
So it's basically like you have a master setup almost in that situation, which traffic only flows to one, but you can perform the DDL operations on the other database.
Yeah, and they
additive only, right?
Sorry, go ahead.
If you do schema modifications, it would have to be additive only, right? Like you wouldn't be able to drop a column or move data around, or would it intelligently remap, I guess, based on queries? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I didn't even think of doing that, because Personally, I think it's a really bad practice to ever like drop columns once you've done them in any kind of like application of substance. But yeah, there you go. You can only make replication compatible changes, so that makes sense.
Yep. There we go. Thanks.
Yeah, yeah, because it is using replication at the end of the day, so it's not going to do anything like, you know, anything crazy. But you know, from my perspective, I think that the fact that it intelligently will handle the traffic routing for you. So imagine this is kind of like setting, you know, sticking a load balancer in front of two instances that are being like replicated to one another. You can do whatever you want to one of them, and then at whatever point you want in the future, just switch the where the traffic is actually being sent, whether it's to the blue side or the green side, which I think is great.
Yeah, that's cool.
Do you know if they save your money somehow? Like, do they reuse the same compute layer and just swap the data layer, or like, or it does cost double of a regular instance?
I think you end up having two separate clusters, because like literally you have another cluster that you can apply, you can upgrade to a different version and everything that isn't that's different from the other one. So it's definitely 2x price.
This is optimizing for DR and availability,
not price,
not cost.
Yeah. So I used this practice before it existed in AWS. We just had to create a separate cluster every time from a snapshot, then sync it up to the main just to test our migrations on the latest data set. So yeah, we had to do this all manually for a long time. But the most valuable thing here is the rollback capability, because there might be some non-breaking changes that Aurora lets you do, like running migrations might be non-breaking, like it will not affect traffic or something. But if you need to roll back, then that's a real pain usually.
Yeah.
So instant rollback is like a super handy here.
Comments on rollback. What is the rollback story?
Snapshots.
If something, if something got broke, like your migration didn't work, your data got corrupted, the only way to do that previously was basically run your previous snapshot, instantiate your previous snapshot and move everything there. So it was a downtime. But since you're here, it's just switching between blue and green. If something didn't work or something went wrong, you just switch back and you're good again. You just investigate in the background.
Or you don't switch at all, I guess. And you just
And so to say, we used DNS to switch between two instances before this existed. So we didn't require any load balancer. We just switched DNS between them. So we had this like a database 1, 2, 3, and then count went up. Whenever we migrate something, we just create a new one.
Is it also for Postgres, or is it only for MySQL?
Oh, maybe I confused the two. Did I say? I said Postgres. I know. I thought it was only for Postgres, but maybe it's only for MySQL.
Then it makes a lot more sense to me because of the way they do the replication in MySQL. Yeah.
Does it say that? Does it say that right at the top? Does it say it's only for MySQL? I don't know. Let me see.
Third paragraph.
No, it's all of them. There it is.
Really?
MySQL, MariaDB. I guess it is only. Yeah, so it is only MySQL.
MySQL variants.
Yep.
And I guess it's not supported for regional classes either.
Yeah, or like this is only for regional, probably not for global.
Sorry. Yes, I meant to say global. Yeah.
That'll be tricky.
Yeah.
My understanding is the Postgres, RDS Postgres Aurora does like the replication at the block level, and not using like a protocol level replication.
That very well could be. I've fallen off of my knowledge on how all these things work as there become more and more of them.
Yeah. Okay, next announcement. CloudFront launches continuous deployment support, which is interesting how they talk about it. I mean, then down here they talk about that it's actually a form of like blue, green, or canary, where you can deploy to CloudFront and send some percentage of your traffic with sticky sessions through to that version. This means you can have more stable deployments to CloudFront, where clients might be on older versions of your static assets and front end and so forth. Previously, I'm sure people have implemented similar things like with Edge Lambdas or something, but I guess this brings first-class support.
Yeah, before you had to do DNS trickery to make this all work, and now you can do it without changing the DNS config, which I think is really cool how this will work now, especially the fact that they let you do canary, so you can actually gradually like release those static assets, which I think is really cool.
Especially since changes on CloudFront take so long to make.
Yeah. Well, and not only that, but then a lot of times you end up having to do like invalidations as a result of that. And then like if you don't actually fingerprint all of your assets, which not everyone does as a best practice, you should, I'll just say that, but then they end up having to do invalidation so that the caches all get busted. And then you end up increasing all your traffic like immediately to the back end, you know, that are missing the caches and actually hitting the source S3 bucket. So there's actually a lot of ways that this can help, you know, roll out things in a more efficient way.
Mm-hmm. All right. Next announcement is more optimizations for Lambda. So, you know, AWS Lambda is probably one of the first platforms out there for this kind of serverless. And as what comes with that is the first mover advantage is the disadvantage that it's suboptimal to many of the other options out there. So continuously, they've been working on optimizing it. I believe you know, last year they introduced, was it a reInvent the warm pools or something of functions, and then this year now is snapshotting the actual state of the VM of the first launch for any given Lambda, so that it can just restore that state when the function comes online. So that should be faster. I forget what they said, what the claims are in terms of performance improvements.
I think it depends what your code's doing, but for instance, if you're using like some sort of this particular, like the biggest offender on Lambdas is obviously anything that runs on the Java runtime, and in this case, like it will actually do, like it will do the init phase, which means that it will compile. Right. It will compile the bytecode, and especially if you're doing things like within Spring, where generally you have a bunch of IOC containers and you're doing injections of dependency and all that kind of stuff on startup, which can take a lot of time to get all your backing services like hooked up and all those things. I think they were saying like they've seen that take as long as like over 10 seconds on traditional Lambdas, and this is going to be like sub 1 second on you know, using this SnapStart stuff. So I think specifically, I think that one is huge.
That makes sense, especially in context of Java. Yeah.
Yeah. Especially because there they have to do the compilation of your function basically, which takes, you know, that takes a while.
Here's another one. One of the challenges with AWS is that they have like a dozen or more security tools out there: Security Hub, Config, Guard Duty, Macie, Inspector, IAM Access Analyzer, CloudTrails, VPC Flow Logs, and that's all that came to my top of my mind. But they provide really no way of sifting through that enormous amount of data. So they are coming out with Security Lake Preview. Prior to this, companies were using something like Splunk or Sumo Logic, or Datadog now has a SIM as well. I'm not sure if this is technically a SIM, but I guess this would be one step closer to that. I wonder at what point they're just going to announce AWS SIM.
Yeah, so the one thing that I think is definitely along the path towards that is, as part of this, they're going to translate the format of all of those things into OCSF, which is the Open Cybersecurity Schema Framework. Yeah, there you go. And it's basically like an industry standard thing that everyone that every SIM out there will essentially work with data that's collected in that way. So I think at the end of the day, they might be coming up with an Amazon SIM, maybe, but this will also enable other SIMs to point at that S3, data lake to ingest all the information in a standard format from all the AWS services that exist. And this is like, common event formats and common timestamps and correlation IDs and all of the things that you would kind of were proprietary formats before, or now like in cool. OCSF. Yeah, so
that's cool. Well, that's playing together. I like it. The next announcement, or before we move on that security preview announcement for the Security Lake, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think that I think the likely destination of what you were talking about, what's the tool that they came up with? QuickSight, maybe?
Yeah.
QuickSight, I think, might be the logical destination of starting to see some dashboards appear in there that use the data lake as a data source to gather that information. So it'd be interesting to see what they do.
All coming together.
Yeah, over time.
The next announcement is interesting. Like you
Confusing.
made. Yeah. So everyone's familiar with AWS App Mesh. Well, now there's this transit gateways. Well, now there's a new product called VPC Lattice, which is simplifying networking for service-to-service communication. It seems to be somewhere on the mesh spectrum, but I guess it's noticeably different from App Mesh, and I need help interpreting this announcement.
Yeah, I can. I did a deep dive on this one as much as I could from what I saw, and essentially what it does is it creates an overlay network that can span VPCs, and then, like a service mesh, your services can each register either an HTTPS or a gRPC listener onto there, and then you can then create policies using IAM that can determine which services are allowed to communicate with which other services across this mesh. And it has built-in observability, instrumentation, and some other things on top of it. Sorry, say that again?
TLS, I assume?
Yeah, so TLS is one of the things that it has there, and then they have all these listener rules and target groups, so you can like logically group these things together. Imagine a logical group being like your dev and stage and prod being separated from one another, but on the same service, the same lattice network or whatever the thing is called, et cetera, et cetera. So I think it's interesting, but it's confusing to me with how it fits into all of their other offerings.
Yeah.
This is one of the biggest launches, and the information available, like, trust me, this is one of the biggest launches of re:Invent, along with the IAM verified thingy. But there is very, very, very little information about it available. I expect we're gonna get either a keynote or a dedicated talk about this service. It's a really, really big deal. I
agreed.
think this will be the biggest networking improvement in AWS since VPCs were introduced.
Yeah, I really like this idea. This is right. It seems like a so much simpler approach than the current status quo of how service meshes are implemented. What I don't see with this is a sidecar required. That's the thing I'm hoping it's not required, right?
It's done at the transport layer essentially. So it's done like as a virtual network. So all of the compute things that we would have out there that, you know, so EC2 instances, ECS, EKS, Lambda, all support this basically as a target. And so they can essentially like hook into the network, and then it's all taken care of at the network layer. You know, and presumably at the network layer of the pod for containerized things, and you know, in the Lambda function for the Lambda, and you know, all of that stuff. But like that's why I said at the beginning, I was just kind of iterating with, or I was saying the same thing that Vlad was saying, was that I did a deep dive as deep as you can dive on it right now, and I still have lots of questions and kind of like, this is really cool, but ... how is this going to work? But I share the same sentiment that I think this is going to, if this is the direction it works, and you know, this is the direction they're going in, this seems to make a whole hell of a lot of sense to kind of replace not only service mesh, but also like you won't need transit gateway for service to service communication. Maybe you need it for some other reason, but
Visioning or something. Maybe.
yeah. So, and the other thing that I think is really interesting with this is that you can use it with overlapping IP address space.
Yeah.
And you can do the same kind of canary and blue-green deployments and all of those kinds of things at the network layer. So you could spin up a new version of a service and say, send 10% of my, you know, my traffic this way and that way. And I don't know, it seems like they're taking the functionality of a whole ton of their products and stuffing it into this new way of doing things. So I'm hopeful, but I can't wait. I can't wait to see what the actual, like, you know, API interface for building one of these things looks like, because it seems like it's going to be really complicated, but hopefully not, knock on wood.
I'm wondering though, for like the implementation for Kubernetes, seems like it would be a new type of service that you deploy. So like there's type load balancer, this would be like type Lattice or something. And then that's how you'd probably expose it, rather than exposing the pod individually.
It says there's a Kubernetes gateway, if you link, which is another topic that is not at all talked about. And they said, oh yeah, AWS gateway controller for Kubernetes. Like nobody has any idea what it is. To figure out what it is, you need to get no. You're not gonna find anything on it. Trust
you
me.
have to opt into the preview, and then they give you access.
AWS employees, mentioned on Twitter that no, this is gated by the preview. They're gonna get into how it works. Again, I am expecting a deep dive talk or a keynote section on this. Makes sense. We'll see if we get that or not.
Yeah.
Also, this being multi-account by default is a very, very interesting hint at multi-VPC. Like it's a preview and it already supports multi-account and multi-VPC, and the pricing page is interesting, especially the fact that the preview service has a pricing page. Like that's not really heard of.
Wow. And join the preview. All right. We'll have to look into that. I'm really excited. Thanks for bringing that to my attention. Before we move on, anything else to mention on Lattice? Anyone? Okay.
Well, this is kind of my gut reaction, because just hearing this now, it almost seems like what Lattice represents is kind of a hybrid moving away from traditional kind of subnetting and VPC structures and taking that routing aspect that we use VPCs for now and just saying like, here's this completely it's already software defined networking on the back end, right? But here's this more direct approach to managing how ENIs talk to each other.
Yeah.
So, and it seems like they're borrowing language from load balancers with target groups and whatnot. So it seems like it's almost like you would
basically
API perspective be kind of like a meta load balancer kind of sense, which
you're moving from TCP IP to just some abstract object.
it's fascinating. I'm curious about the security concerns.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
I actually think the security piece of it is pretty interesting, because now you can write that's what I was going to say, is like, so that's certainly one layer. What you brought up is one layer, right, of it, but that it seems to be that's what they're doing. But I think that reducing it to that is not giving it enough credit to all the things that it does, because being able to write service to service policies about what's allowed to talk to what and when and with what conditions, if you imagine all the things you can do in the same language we can already use, like in using IAM permissions, seems really powerful, and seems like you can increase the security story significantly with that. Like right now we're mostly not doing that. Like if you're on the same network, you can oftentimes talk to one another, like, if you're on the same pod network or whatever, unless you're using a service mesh or something that makes this easy, people aren't taking it to that level. And I think you can now do that pretty easily. But also I would say by introducing the observability things in here, and also the control, like the traffic flow and traffic control pieces into this, makes it extremely powerful for you being able to have granular control over what can talk to what in what aspects, and how you do upgrades, and how you observe all of that and measure that. And I think, imagine like how much easier this is going to be to say, like, I deployed version 1 of my service, I have a baseline set of metrics, I now set out 10% of my traffic to go to version 2 of my service. Now I can compare, are my error rates the same? Is my average throughput the same? Is my X, Y, and Z the same? And if so, then now I can dial up traffic to version 2 of the service. If not, let me dial it down and leave version 1 of the service running. It really seems like it's going to simplify those types of deployment strategies, which only the largest of enterprises are usually doing that right now, because doing all that is extremely complicated to get that all right. So I'm pretty excited if it all kind of figures itself out over the next year or so that the Amazon products usually take to mature.
Yeah, one user story that might be interesting in our case is we use AWS VPCs and resource sharing, resource access. I can't remember what it's called. RAM.
Yeah, resource access manager.
Right. Thank you. So we use RAM to essentially share out certain VPCs, but and then of course we use security groups to manage control between blah blah blah, and then we have load balancers for various blah blah blah. But I could see how essentially we could take that duct tape that we've been using to cobble together these kind of federated networks and use something that's more flat. So that might be the value prop there. Interesting.
Yeah.
I think also, I don't think they explicitly say it here, but I could also see this extending to on-prem at some point, so that you can actually, I think that is a big indicator of why they have the overlapping IP addresses and those kinds of things, so that you can have some sort of like federated services that talk to your legacy data centers and also your cloud environment, and get rid of all the crazy like NATs and NAT gateway type of things that we're having to do for address translation and all of that stuff back and forth. So
You have Lattice.
just me speculating.
Oh man.
Yeah.
Oh man, Matt. If you're predicting the return of hybrid cloud marketing.
Oh man. All right. So
I
the
don't
next,
want to name it. I just want to say what it is.
so the next announcement is OpenSearch now available in a serverless mode preview. This is cool. So you can both for your smaller development environments, not have to fork over all the money to run an OpenSearch cluster, but also for your larger environments, scale as necessary, which without having to worry about how or when. Anybody who's been, I can't speak for OpenSearch, but for Elasticsearch, it really sucks to scale that. And I don't know how they're doing it on their side. But like, when you want to resize an Elasticsearch cluster, depending on the size of that data, come back in a week and it might be done. Those are really slow operations, guaranteed to time out your Terraform.
Yeah, what I think is interesting with this is that the backing store of this is S3. So clearly they just compute they just move the compute around to keep up with your demand. And then somehow they use S3 and indexing, the indexes stored there. So I don't think you need to they don't need to do cluster migrations like was necessary in Elasticsearch, like you were talking about, because the storage never moves. It's just how they index it and how they search it. And and then there are two kind of pricing switches and dials that you can look at. So one is basically on the indexing, the ingestion side, as that scales up and down independently from the read/search side, which I think is pretty interesting as well. So lots of people have very heavy loads one way or another, and they had to scale their entire cluster to deal with that. And now this is actually giving you incremental ways to scale just the side of the load that is necessary, for whatever your workload is.
That's very exciting. I like it. Anyone have anything else to add to the OpenSearch serverless announcement?
There was a lot of hate because the minimum pricing for this is $700 a month.
Oof, okay, never mind.
But this is in preview. They are listening to feedback. Like the product manager said on Twitter, this is preview. Yes, this is a limitation of the preview. They're hoping to improve this by the time the service evolves. So it's a preview.
Yeah, although I think they've even updated the pricing since then, since they announced it a couple of days ago, because I just looked at it. I think it was either late last night or this morning, and it looked like when I did the calculation, it was about $350 was the minimum for a month, unless I just calculated it wrong or read something wrong. But yeah, because I had read that, and then when I did the calculation, it didn't seem like it was. It didn't seem like there was that much. It was listed in that in the thing that we gave you.
Oh,
It's
what?
right down. Yeah, there you go. Yeah, there you go. Yeah, so it's 24 cents per OCU hour, and I think they're basically.
And you need two of each, so two indexing, two search and query.
Right. So it's 1,400.
1,400.
Yeah. Plus storage. Yeah, so you're right. I did misread that part.
Again, it's a preview. I wouldn't say normal because it's definitely not normal having a preview that costs at least $700 a month, but I'm expecting this is going to improve.
Yeah, so I take back what I said about your using this for your developer environments.
It might sound expensive for serverless, but it doesn't sound expensive for Elasticsearch of any meaningful size.
Yeah, of any means.
Yeah, exactly.
That's true.
I am very excited about the scaling of this. Scaling Elasticsearch, especially when you have spikes in usage, has not been a trivial thing, to put it nicely. And I'm really looking forward to seeing how they solve that problem. I am not price sensitive. And
Yeah.
but I am very much performance and scale sensitive, and I'm hoping this will improve on those metrics a lot.
Yeah. So I looked back at my note that I made to myself, and so the cost for the basic cost is $700 per month plus storage costs, whatever you have in storage, which the storage seems pretty reasonable. But so it was 24 cents times 730 hours times 4, because you need a minimum of 2 reads, 2 writes. So that all equals $700.80 to be precise for the month to get that going. But it's a lot less expensive than a dedicated cluster.
Yeah. Last announcement was just more performance improvements to EFS. Read latencies have been reduced by up to 60% for working with frequently accessed data. And then 40% speed up on write operations when working with small files. So
you can read into this. They introduced some sort of a caching layer.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Better cache performance. And when working with small files, because let's face it, I think a big use case of this, as they mentioned down here below, is like content management WordPress. Basically, they're saying, so they can attract more WordPress hosting providers to AWS. They are introducing these cache performances.
Yes.
All right. I'm out of announcements for AWS reInvent. Let's see here. Verified permissions. This was the other thing you were talking about, Vlad. Let's see. What is this about?
Yeah, in my view, this is the other really big announcement for reInvent. So this is IAM, but for your app. It's a competitor to also. I pasted the link, which is a startup. They have a better page that explains the product. So basically, everybody has in their application to implement IAM restrictions and rights and permissions and management. And it's non-trivial to do. It's risky because, again, you don't want to accidentally mess up permissions and have everybody access everybody else's data. And this is the AWS way of solving it. It's very comprehensive, tested. I believe they mentioned doing automated reasoning for this, and it's something that I think is going to make building applications and managing permissions a lot easier. And this is integrating with AppSync, with API Gateway. So you just say, yeah, I have users in my app. Admin users can access everything. Otherwise, each user can only access its own data, and it's just gonna work. It's a preview, la-di-da-di-da, but it signifies a big investment from AWS. Again, it's easier just to look at the Boston website because they have a better story. But yeah, this is a big deal because AWS does have massive experience with IAM.
Yeah, I think the thing that surprised me here is that that this somehow wasn't part of Cognito.
I was scratching my head here. And it's not even mentioned on the page. Like,
no, I know.
Cognito, what?
It says identity provider in the top right. That is Cognito, and it integrates with Cognito. But yeah, like this is a lot of undifferentiated heavy lifting. Like everybody has to build this. Yeah. A lot of people make mistakes because it's not easy to build this. Some hopefully discover their mistakes, others don't, and at least do really embarrassing things. So I am excited for this to mature. Like I was extremely excited when I saw also announce their product, and now AWS also jumping in here is hopefully means that in a couple of years we're not gonna have to stress and every single company having a different permission system.
Yeah, I think the other interesting part here is that definitely the not building the 80% of things that can be standardized makes a lot of sense. But I think from a large scale enterprise perspective, this actually really simplifies the audit and governance side of it, which I think is the real driving factor behind why they're doing it, is so that these large companies can say, like, how do I know that in your custom application code that Eric doesn't have access to X, Y, and Z when he shouldn't, that kind of thing. And the single responsibility, principles and all of those things have been a largely missing gap. It's been kind of like you have to audit application code to figure that out. And now I think using a standardized product, it's a lot easier for these companies to figure that out when audit time comes along. So.
I'm pretty sure they mentioned integrating with auditors and getting this validated somewhere on the
I think
page
it says
or in the blog post.
manage and govern policy. I think that's in that third column there, whatever that is. I think it's there. Yeah.
No, not only that, but they again, I could be wrong with this, but I think they mentioned working with auditors and having auditor specific features for this, which is a really big deal and shows if AWS says, yeah, in this app only X has access to Y thing, that's a lot more trustable and verifiable than me, the Lambda developer, saying, yeah, only X has access to Y.
Yeah. I also think an interesting thing is that the policy language, I think what you can see there is just listed just under the fold there is Cedar. No, I'm sorry, right under the top, like nav bar, you just had it right there. Yep. And that's actually like an industry kind of standard version. Like Microsoft is using that for a lot of their things now. And I think it came out of, I forget where they came, but I think we're trying to, I think what's happening now is that they're trying to build like a common policy language across platforms and all of those types of things. So I hope that means, to Vlad's point, that even if we do have policies now for these things and you decide to switch providers, that hopefully they'll all kind of standardize on Cedar, and then you won't have to redo all your work if you decide that Amazon's product isn't the right thing for you. So kind of in the way that OPA is like the standard, like for open policies, like Cedar seems to be one for this. So should be interesting.
Yeah, but can you actually help me understand that differentiator? Like, why Cedar for this and OPA for something else, or why not OPA for all of it, or why not Cedar for all of it?
Well, OPA specifically will only work on like JavaScript. I mean, not JavaScript, on JSON like content, where Cedar has like a different, like it's an entirely. I don't know that it's Turing complete, but it's a much broader broader scope for what it does and how it works, and all of those kinds of things. So it has much more of it's an authorization framework. So it's basically like, I think it's around the whole principal resource, and then allowed deny kind of thing. So, yeah, I don't know. I got to remember. I'm having a hard time remembering where it came from. There was, I can't remember. Someone came up with it, and I can't remember. I can't remember the origin story on it.
Interesting. So this Cedar policy here, though, it's interesting. It's managed by AWS Security.
I thought Cedar was just released and it was an Amazon thing.
I'm almost positive this is an industry collaboration, unless I'm confusing it with something else.
You very well could be right. I like everybody. I was also overloaded with announcements, and I'm confused.
Yeah, I had like a million
levels.
Me too. My brain is full at this point. But I could have sworn that I read that this was a collaboration between Amazon and Microsoft and some other people that created this whole policy. But maybe I'm crazy. I don't know. Maybe I'm giving out misinformation. Let's verify that before before we sense. I don't know, because I just did a quick Google search. And I can't
Nothing
find it
jumps,
anywhere.
exactly, nothing jumps out yet. Okay. Interesting.
I
Okay.
wonder if since they now adopt this CIDR in a authorization service, can we see and CIDR also adopted for IAM or vice versa, or like IAM syntax adopted for this product? Because I really love IAM syntax. Like I get used to the conditions and wildcards, and so.
What are you, a glutton for punishment? Who can love IAM syntax?
Yeah.
You mean Jason? You mean?
I personally just find IAM to be very confusing to ever get it right. Maybe it's just a mental block I have. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know. There must be something about it.
Yeah. I find it incredibly powerful, but hard to get right.
Yeah, exactly.
And like the only way you can really get it working is logging into the UI and mucking around with it enough times or iterating on your code. But like getting it right the first time, you got to question yourself, wait, why is this working? It's probably wrong. So
especially with complicated conditions and all of those kind of things.
Since we only have 1 minute left, I would also like to add that this was a really data-heavy reInvent until now. So Glue got a bunch of announcements, Athena got a bunch of announcements, Redshift got some fascinating announcements. Like data people should be really, really, really happy.
Yeah, and there's a ton of just other overarching machine learning and artificial intelligence things. Especially one of the things I saw was they introduced a new product that targets like the human genome and being able to work with it and search it and do a bunch of other really cool stuff, which I think is it's crazy. So Amazon is clearly expanding their healthcare side of their business.
yeah. Yeah, I guess that doesn't really leave us much time to answer some questions. One that is reInvent related is what do you think about the AWS KMS external key store announcement? And what are some of the use cases of that? Any quick chime in on that one?
Yeah, I'll add that. So go ahead, Bud.
No, go ahead, Matt, please.
I was going to give a quick one. I was going to give a quick one that said highly, I think this is very welcome for highly security conscious organizations that have always been worried that Amazon owns their private key material if they use KMS, and if Amazon has a problem or a breach, they, everything that they use to encrypt, KMS with is potentially available and to the public or to the, to the person who's breached it, or they have some sort of a disaster recovery problem, or they lose the key material. That's a problem, and I think now this gives those large organizations the ability to kind of say, I want to safeguard that on my own network with some system that I own and trust, kind of end to end, and only be able to verify with that. I think it's interesting, but I don't think anyone except the largest of large or very extremely security paranoid are going to use it. So think like banking and those types of people like would generally be the ones that I would see using this. So I don't know if you're going to add anything else, Vlad, but feel free to do that was my quick and dirty answer.
Maybe for crypto as well.
I agree with it. I saw a bunch of people being excited about this for GDPR, but I think it's a bit much. and it's a very, very intense thing. And I so don't look forward to seeing the post-mortems of this. Like, you have to implement the API for this, you have to host it. AWS specifically mentions that if the response times are above 250 milliseconds, you're going to see cascading failures, because every single call needs the key and needs to authenticate to that. So it's going to be a very, very complicated thing to manage. And I fear that a lot of people will go into this now with their eyes open, and they're gonna lose the keys and lose state time and have very fun outages. That's the short of it, but I haven't dived into.
One other quick thing, like I could foresee someone who's using like self-hosted Vault or like their like the HashiCorp like Vault on the on their SaaS platform, saying that it's interesting to have Vault be like the single source of truth for all keys like everywhere. If they could start to implement those types of things, but completely rolling your own, like Vlad was just talking about, seems like a really scary proposition to me. But you know, and I'm just using Vault as one example. It could be anyone that's in that space, but those are the types of systems I expect to see kind of plug in to be the owners of the key material at some point. So it'll be interesting to see where this goes.
Interesting. Well, that was a really interesting office hours. Thanks everyone for bringing all those announcements to our attention. For those of you at reInvent, sounds like a good one to attend. Join us next week, same time, same place for office hours every Wednesday at 11:30 Pacific. We host these calls every week. You can sign up for them at cloudposse.com/office hours. Again, that's cloudposse.com/office hours. Subscribe to us on YouTube by going to youtube.com/cloudposse. Again, youtube.com/cloudposse. Or connect with me on LinkedIn, linkedin.com/in/Osterman. Look forward to seeing you all next week. Have a great rest of your week. Take care.